again, we talked about how when the brain switches from one task to another, it costs metabolic energy. So we talked about that before. Okay. So oh, we don't have the example here on the screen, but there is a very famous experiment. And I think if you've been in a psychology program within the last 30 years, you have definitely seen this. But what's happening in this experiment, and that's why it says we missed the gorilla at the top. Without context, that's a weird sentence, right? But we missed the gorilla because what's happening is you have a group of about, I can't remember, it's like 10, 15 people, and they're throwing a basketball. And your job, you're told to focus on the basketball. So the basketball becomes something that you are supposed to be paying attention to. And you're watching them pass around the basketball, and then they're dribbling and they're doing it behind their back, and they're all moving. So there's a bunch of movement. Well, in the middle of that video, a gorilla, a person in a gorilla suit, literally just walks across the screen, and nobody sees it. The vast majority of people watching this video are completely behooved. They don't see the gorilla at all, but the gorilla was there. And so the gorilla was in plain sight. It wasn't doing anything mysterious. It wasn't trying to be sneaky. It literally just walks across the screen plain as day. But the reason we don't see it is because we were told to pay attention to the basketball. And so our reticular activating system has focused on basketball, and things that are not basketball get filtered out. It says about 50% of the people miss the gorilla, but I remember in class everybody did. It's one of those stats where I don't know where they come up with that. I'm sure they did some experiments and came up with 50%, but when our class did it, I don't think anybody saw the basketball. So that was like 100% of people. So, and we're going to tie this in, but we're talking about selective attention. Well, why does that matter? Why would we need to be selective of our attention? Why would we need to be purposeful with our attention? And again, we talked about this in a previous video, but if you don't, someone else will. So if you're not being selective and deliberate with your attention, then somebody is going to attempt to capture your attention and commodify it, turn you into a consumer. They want your money. They want something from you. And they may not even know it. I can think back into high school, where somebody was trying to convince me of something. And they didn't consciously maybe know that they were manipulating me or trying to manipulate me. They were just doing it. It was just a part of their presentation, you could say. So another thing that we do is we get stuck in feedback loops. And this is a habit. This is a habit of the mind. The pathway of these neural network is the same. It's a familiar path. It's just like if you were walking in a cornfield or you're walking in a forest. If you go down that same direction, if you walk that exact same way, you're going to start to forge a path. And the human brain works very similarly. So the more that you do something, the more that path becomes visible, at least in the forest when you're walking, but in the brain, the path becomes deeper and it can be harder to change. And so some of the things that get stuck in this feedback loop, we can get angry, we can be very reactive, it can cue some of our mental happenings such as anxiety or depression. So in a way, unbeknownst to most people, your attention is a source of fuel. It's like a source of energy that can bring them something that they want, whether it's money, whether it's you doing something for them. Maybe since they've captured your attention, you're now willing to carry out tasks. So it's all the same thing, and it's a lot like farming. So in some ways, Depending on where you're at in the world, I can't say this is the case everywhere, but depending on where you are in the world, especially the westernized, you know, technologically advanced cultures, especially capitalism, or whenever there's profit involved, and then even if it's not capitalism, there's still other forms of control. There's other reasons that they would want for you to do something in a way that they want you to do it, whoever they is in the situation. It could be governments, it could be smaller than that. It could be like school systems or social groups. We would call that peer pressure at a certain point when social groups are attempting to convince you to do something and you're not sure if you want to do it. You're not feeling it for some reason, but you still do it anyway. And so that was an example of where your attention was just farmed. Somebody pruned it, they tended to it in such a way to capture it, and then the fruit of that is whatever they're getting from you, whether that's your money, whether that's more of your attention, or whether that's you doing something physically for them. It reminds me, and I don't talk about this movie very often, but it does remind you a lot, or reminds me a lot of The Matrix. We've been essentially turned into a fuel source, a food source for people who want to consume.